Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Today we're focusing on the power of testimony, and nowhere is that more evident than in the case of the late Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted paedophile. His crimes, along with those of his longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell, who's currently behind bars, continue to have far-reaching consequences to this very day. In a moment, I'll be talking to Jess Michaels, herself a victim of rape by Epstein, and Lucia Osborne-Crowley, a journalist who covered the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. But this story first got worldwide attention thanks to the testimony of Virginia Giuffre, who was among the first victims to publicly accuse Epstein of trafficking her for sex. Now, just months after she took her own life at 41 years old, the publication of her posthumous memoir has caused shockwaves for many of those mentioned in the book, including one British prince.
Virginia Giuffre has taken down a prince. Those are the words of the victim's brother in the wake of the former Prince Andrew's fall from royal status. King Charles III's decision to strip his brother of his title and spacious home are being seen as a direct result of Giuffre's memoir, published 6 months after she took her own life. A statement from Buckingham Palace reads, "Their Majesties' utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse." In Nobody's Girl, Giuffre maintains allegations she had sex with the then British royal on 3 separate occasions, having been trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell as a minor. Allegations that Andrew continues to deny. In 2022, though, he paid her a multi-million-dollar settlement, closing the civil case against him. The California native waived her right to anonymity to speak out about what she had endured at the hands of Epstein. And even after the criminal case against him ended in 2019 because he had been found dead in his jail cell, Giuffre was still determined to bring the truth to light.
I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice.
Maxwell, Epstein's key accomplice and ex-girlfriend, was convicted in 2021 on federal sex trafficking and conspiracy charges and is serving a 20-year sentence in Florida. While Giuffre's allegations are echoed by dozens of women, Epstein was only ever found guilty of procuring a minor for prostitution in 2008, for which he served just a year in a low-security facility. Epstein was known to have enjoyed a close friendship with Donald Trump, something that the US president has played down in recent years.
I did have a falling out a long time ago. The reason doesn't make any difference, frankly, but I haven't spoken to him in probably 15 years or more.
Trump went so far as to say the files containing evidence of Epstein's numerous sexual assaults should be made public. It was one of his 2024 campaign promises. Now, many survivors of Epstein's crimes and American lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are advocating for the files' release, something he now firmly opposes.
I call it the Epstein hoax.
Now, watching that report with me from New England in the US is Jess Michaels, herself a victim of rape by Epstein, and Lucia Osborne-Crowley, a journalist and author of The Lasting Harm, written about the process of covering Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. And a reminder to any viewer watching that this conversation may serve as a trigger for anyone who's been the victim of sexual violence. Firstly, thanks to both of you for giving me some of your time. Jess, let me start with you. Would you mind telling me about your encounter with Jeffrey Epstein?
In 1991, I was a successful professional dancer. I was thriving in my life with fabulous relationships. I was traveling all over the world. I was living my dreams. And when I returned back from Tokyo, from a job in Tokyo, my roommate was telling me all about a wealthy Wall Street guy that she was working for. And over the next couple of months, she then introduced me to him. I met him for an interview at his Madison Avenue office, and then I was invited to his penthouse the following week as a follow-up. And it was there that I was raped. And I tell my story publicly because when I was raped, I froze. And back in 1991, what I understood about the laws was that rape was only determined by how much you resisted, how much you said no. And because I froze in 1991, I believed it was my fault. I thought I was stupid. And that very vibrant and confident and successful young girl launching into the world at 22 soured into self-consciousness and fear, isolation, and lived that way and developed post-traumatic stress disorder for 30 years.
Jess, even though you haven't had your day in court yet, do you think a woman's testimony carries far more weight now than it did before the Me Too movement?
That's a great question. I do think that people are listening, and there is validation, I think, to a degree. And I believe that it is this Epstein case that is actually furthering the idea that we should have been listening to women all along when they've shared their stories. So I think it carries a little bit more power, and we have so far to go because, as I understand, some laws are only just now changing in France around consent. And as I said, the laws back in 1991 said it was only dependent on how much I resisted and said no. So I think we're far off from laws changing, but I think we're listening to women a little bit more.
And Lucia, even for women to come forward at this point of time, it's still a very traumatic process, isn't it?
Absolutely. The way that our society still unfortunately views rape and sexual abuse means that there is so much shame and stigma around this issue, and that makes it both difficult to come forward and incredibly re-traumatizing when we do come forward. And that is a really, really big problem. That's one of the things that I think most needs to change before we see real justice in cases like this, because we need to create a world in which it is safe for these victims to come forward and tell the truth.
And we saw that here in France in the case of Gisèle Pellicot, a 73-year-old grandmother, where there was filmed evidence and clearly the accusations proved to be correct. But even she underwent very harsh questioning at the hands of the defendant's lawyers.
And that's a really good example of some of the problems with the criminal justice system in terms of these offences, because even when victims do come forward and do get their day in court, they are subject to often very, very shaming tactics at the hands of defence lawyers, which I, as someone who is legally trained, really believe that we can and should change. There are certain types of questions that I think defence lawyers should not be allowed to ask victim survivors of these kinds of crimes, because it is incredibly re-traumatizing. And I know that those who testified at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial suffered incredibly from the re-traumatization process of that trial.
And Jess, with that in mind, how hard was it for you to tell your story publicly?
Initially, I started trying to tell my story and found that it was too much, and then I backed off. So it's been a slow process of being able to even address the fact that I had been raped and how devastated my life was after it. There's a lot of self-honesty and therapy that is hard to get through before you feel safe enough. And that's, I actually want to go back to what Lucia said about safety. Our testimony may have greater weight now, but I don't know that we have greater safety yet for survivors to come forward. So we're saying our stories, people are listening, but it doesn't mean that we're getting more justice. I mean, incremental.
Lucia, the involvement of Ghislaine Maxwell in this horrific story reveals that even women, though not very often, can also be the perpetrator of horrific sexual violence.
This is a really, really important point that all of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell really, really want people to know is that she was culpable, that to them they were betrayed and abused by her as much as they were by him. And we see a lot of people kind of trying to, I guess, make excuses for her. But it's really important that we recognise her role in this, because actually what prosecutors said at trial and what we know the jury ultimately accepted is that she was a really crucial part of this sex trafficking ring. In many ways, what the prosecutors were saying is that it would not have worked without her, because she, as a woman, her role was to gain the trust of the victims that she then groomed, in a way that perhaps Jeffrey Epstein, as a middle-aged man, couldn't have at that time, certainly not going into high schools or middle schools. So her role, it really can't be overstated how important it is that we acknowledge that women do this, and that there are many stories where there are women who play these roles.
Jess, Virginia Giuffre paid the ultimate price in the end, committing suicide in April, but her bravery lives on. What lessons can we draw from this horrendous episode where young, vulnerable women were subjected to such appalling abuse by extremely powerful men?
First, I have to say this. Virginia Giuffre is one of the women that saved my life. If she hadn't come forward in that 2018 piece in the Miami Herald, I don't know that I would have ever addressed my own rape and actually gotten help. And it was her continued fearless voice to stand up to powerful men that really taught me so much about what being an advocate can mean. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, for many reasons. And I think that is actually the lesson that I am learning, that even when I feel scared, I know somehow that's going to maybe influence someone else to be brave enough to tell their story, that as we tell our stories, we are actually shaping things changing. And Virginia Giuffre was that bright light doing it first.
Jess, your final thoughts?
I believe that it's conversations like this that will help advance this issue and concern. We don't have battered men's shelters everywhere. We have battered women's shelters everywhere. So every time we have one of these conversations, I feel like we're taking that tiny step forward. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for highlighting Virginia. Her story is impactful, and I believe is going to make all the difference in how powerful testimony changes this issue.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I want to thank both my guests, Jess Michaels in the US, and with me in the studio, Lucia Osborne-Crowley. Thank you to both of you. And that's it for this edition. So until our next show, bye for now.